If you want to get a copy of the talk that Oliver Markey has so kindly taken today, you can ring me. You have my number. If you don't, you can write it down. 087 7777 081. That's 087 7777 081. I can put Oliver in touch with you. What they want an explanation of fusing in the divine will. So with that, I'll hand you over to Tom. Tom is going to continue his talk till 5 o'clock. We'll have questions for half an hour. After we finish at 5:30, anybody who wants to hear about Gareth Mandel, the warning, the miracle prophecies, can stay back. Not everybody wants to hear about it, but Tom will talk.
Before we get going, there's a good question here. How do you reconcile God needing nothing and his great desire for the company of human beings? And that's a good question. And when you read Catholic theology, just standard theology, we know that God is supreme being and that there's really nothing that he has to have. He has everything, and there's nothing really that he needs to be God and to be happy. But the mystical souls, those who've had great mystical graces, they use a expression, God has the need of love. And so he could live without someone loving him from outside the Trinity, because the three of them love one another and they adore one another. But technically speaking, God does not need anything outside the Trinity itself. But I've never been completely satisfied with that. The more I read mystical literature of different souls, particularly in the 20th century, they speak of God's need of love. And he wants to give love, because that's his nature. He needs someone to give it to. And it's only right that he get a response. And so he wants a response on the same level that he gives. Because he has a divine nature. He's God. And since there are no other gods that could be his companion, to understand him and live a life like he lives, and to love him as a good close friend or whatever, there are no other gods. So they decided that since we got so much, we had the possibility of so much. We have just got to share it with others. We just got to do that. That's in our nature to give. And so we decided to give to human beings, and we designed them for the original state of Adam, and we designed them to exist with our will operating in them so that we could get divine love from them. They would be little gods that we made for ourselves, little children in little children with our own will. They can be part of the divine family, so to speak, and they can love us with divine love. And that was the whole motive, to go outside the Trinity and bring other beings into existence. Then they wanted to give us a really fantastic place to live, so he created the whole universe in an excess of love. And then they gave Adam the power of bilocation. I don't know about Eve, where he was bilocated to all the universe, to be present with God, with his soul, his spiritual soul, and to be God's companion, and to love him back the same way that God loved him. God loved him divinely. That's the only way God can love is divinely. And he wanted us to be able to love him back divinely. So it's true that in a very strict way of looking at it, he doesn't really need anything at all. He can be perfectly happy. But he does say that when we live in the divine will, that we give him new happiness. He even says we even give him surprises. He uses that language quite a bit, as a matter of fact. And I often wonder, how in the world can you surprise God who knows everything, you know? But the only way I can reconcile that would be that the child on his own, you might say, wants to surprise his daddy with a special gift. So his desire to surprise his daddy and to give him something he knows the daddy really likes. So we find, he says, a love for the human beings to find all kinds of ingenious ways to give you surprises. Even though he already knows what they're going to do, he loves the attitude and disposition we have to want to give him a nice surprise, like a good child might want to surprise his daddy one day with something that he knows daddy wants. Like a little girl might make some chocolate brownies for him, and when he comes home, she got a surprise for her daddy. Well, the attitude and disposition and the love of the child want to do that, that's what God enjoys. He really enjoys it. And he says, he does say that his happiness can be increased. He cannot be increased. You know, God's not increasable. He is immutable. But apparently his happiness and joys are new and increased by children living in his will in some way which I don't fully understand yet. But I've read a lot of passages where it talks about how he gets new joys, experience new joys and new delights at every instant. Okay. I thought I'd read a few more points from this. Effects of the destiny of God in man, and man's destiny in God. But I want to read it kind of slow, because I hope we have overhead projection, which we don't. And I wanted to show it on the wall so you can read it as I read it with your eyes. You can read it as I read it, and you can see that time to grasp the meaning of these passages. So I'm going to try to read it kind of slowly. I'm not sure which ones I already read though. No, I'm not so sure if I read some of those. Okay. Here's she, the soul. She, the soul, floods the earth and invests the whole of creation so that all may receive the glory and the joy of the marvels which the divine fiat operated in the act of the creature. All right, so you can see why God the Father was fascinated with Adam and Eve, because he saw creatures with his own will in them operating, and he saw, he watched these marvels, the glory and the joy of the marvels which the divine fiat operated in the act of the creature. By the way, the word divine fiat, F-I-A-T, one of the things that was necessary when he brought the whole creation into being was that he verbalized that act of his will. He could have created the whole universe without saying a word, just wanting it. But he included the word fiat because when I spoke the spoken word, that empowered human beings to be able to speak their spoken word. And it's not just fiat, any word. In order for us to speak, God had to be the one who spoke first. But as there's a term we use, he spoke the universe into existence. So divine fiat is the same as divine will, except that he adds the spoken word as he wills something. If you knew our joy and happiness at seeing your littleness seated, now we've read these before, seated at the table. Well, I remember reading a little more about that. He said that when we were reading the scriptures that would enjoy the banquet table in heaven. But Jesus says that banquet table is where everybody's sort of in some way sits down and we talk about and reveal to them more and more mysteries of the divine will. So it's an intellectual food that we receive instead of a physical food. Yeah, I think I read some of those. She, the soul, lets us put forth our new beauties. Our will working in a soul is so pleasing and tender and delightful to us that it gives us new surprises and sets in motion what is ours to give us a fitting response to our glory, our love, and our happiness. And all this takes place through the soul who has prepared a place for our will to live in her. I first enjoyed the pure joys of creation when, after I had created everything, I created man. And I enjoyed them until he sinned. Between him and us flowed sublime harmonies, common joys, and innocent amusements. We held our arms open always to embrace him and to give him new joys and new graces. And when we gave, we enjoyed ourselves so much that we made a continuous feast for him and for us. I remember reading a lot about the creation of Adam. And he said that we took the clay of the earth and we formed a most beautiful, beautiful statue of a man that no artist would ever be able to do the like. And he says that we laid out in this statue his bones and his nerves, his blood vessels, and his organs, his heart, his brain, and so forth, his eyes. And we took him in our arms before we gave him life. We took him in his arms like parents who go to the crib and they see their baby sound asleep, and the baby, and the parents pick up the baby and they press it to their bosom and they kiss it and give it a little hugs, and then they put the baby back in the crib and it's still asleep. And the baby didn't even know that the parents had given that love to the child. And he said before we gave him the breath of life, we picked him up and we held him to our bosom and we kissed him. And then we breathed into him the breath of life, and he became a living being. And the first words that came out of his mouth were, "I love you, my God, my Father. I love you, the author of my life." Those were the first words of a human being. And so that began human history in the right order of things. The divine order, the perfect place, and the perfect order of things. Divine order. So that began the human history. But it was very soon tested, and then the beautiful plan of God was wiped out. Not completely, because they determined that in the end they would still get what they wanted. Now the marvelous thing about this is that even though we've had 6,000 years of human will messing everything up, and we've 6,000 years of murder, war, all kinds of horrible things going on, impurity to the height, particularly like today, so much impurity. Everything is out of order. Everything's a disaster. Everything is wrong, yes, it seems like. But in spite of all that, all the glory that God had intended to get from every human being, if Adam had not sinned, every human being would have lived in the divine will. And that we got all that perfect glory. But during his hidden life, Jesus went into the operation of the divine will, of course, and he went into all times, past, present, future, and time, and he went into the souls of every single human being and redid their lives while the time that they were on earth. Redid their lives over again in the divine will, the way the Father had wanted them to live, and he gave the Father all the glory as if no one had ever gone out of the divine will. But since he is God by his very nature, then that was very, easy for God to do compared to us. But he said in these last times, I no longer want saints who imitate my exterior life because they didn't know much about my interior life. I want a period of time in which I raise up saints who will imitate my interior life. And that's one of the things that we can do with this gift. We can imitate Jesus and make the intention. We don't know the specifics, of course, of everybody's life. But we make the intention that I want to go into the soul of people in every generation all the way up to the end and redo their lives over again in the divine will. This way, God gets that double glory from souls triple glory, quadruple glory, from souls that God created who had the power to do what Jesus did, imitating his interior life. And which is he was always doing things interiorly that were going on at the same time as doing things exteriorly. And like for example, when St. Joseph was working in a little shop at the house of Nazareth, just to give you an example, Jesus might have walked in from where he was visiting, talking to his mother, and decided to walk in to see what St. Joseph was doing. And as he walked in the door, St. Joseph said, I need a hammer to tap these things together so they'd be nice and tight. So Jesus said, okay, I'll bring in the hammer. So Jesus walks over and gives the hammer to St. Joseph. And it took about 3 or 4 seconds to do that. And somebody passing by might have seen that and said, well, that's a nice boy. He's helping his dad. That's all he would see. But he didn't know that interiorly Jesus was creating souls. He was making the sun shine, and the birds fly, and the fish swim. And he did all these things, and he was doing incredible marvels all over the universe. At the same time, he was handing a hammer to St. Joseph. So this is the vast difference between the saints imitating his exterior life and his interior life. Our fiat has such virtue as to render the creature inseparable from us. And what we do and are by nature, she can do by grace. In other words, by the action of God giving us that power. In creating man, we did not put him at a distance from us. Rather, in order to have him together with us, we gave him our own very will, which would give him the prime act to operate together with his Creator. Now, as I said earlier, one of the things we were discussing is that the divine will is a generator of the prime act of God. The divine will generates a single, ongoing, ever-new, never-ending prime act of God. And from that prime act comes all other things. And all other types of acts all come out from that. And to imagine that God would give it to a human being, the prime act of God, I mean, that's just beyond belief. And in fact, this whole book of evidence is beyond belief. So he wants to give us that because his will, that's the action of his will, to produce that prime act of God. As I pour myself out with you, Louisa, in speaking, I feel as if I were just now giving start to creation. And this is why in these papers I'm making you write the true reason of creation. What my will is, its infinite value, and how one is to live in it, its kingdom, and how it wants to reign to render everyone holy and happy. Creation will be completed by the reigning of our divine will in the midst of creatures. So, as I said before we had the break, after God created the material universe, he started creating another universe in the soul of Adam. It was a spiritual universe of speaking sons. These sons came out of his actions. He moved his fingers and took a step, or he scratched his ear, or whatever. These actions became speaking sons. And these speaking sons would say, I love you, I adore you, I praise you, I glorify you. So every act of Adam was an act of praise, love, adoration, glory, and gratitude. And he goes on to say that in glorious heavens of stars and suns and planets and all that in the spiritual realm were to be created in the souls of men. And that would be when that was finished, and then the end of the creation would be. So now he's got a generation coming up in which he can do that. We're right now in the very beginning stages of the coming of the kingdom, and God depends on us to do our job, even though we may not live into the era when there's no more suffering and no more sin. We're in that beginning stages of laying the foundation for those who are coming. And he says all the good that's going to come in the future will redound to those who are in the beginning, who laid the foundation for the future. And that's us. In the beginning, until we breathed life into Adam, of all things created by us, no one thing had said to us that it loved us. Now, in hearing that man loved us, our joy, our contentment was so great that as a fulfillment of our feast, we constituted him king of all the universe, and the whole universe, and the most beautiful jewel of our creative hands. How beautiful man was in the first times of his creation. He also said in another place in the writings that he created the whole universe just to hear the words, I love you. He wanted to hear someone tell him with his own will, I love you. Told Louisa, when you say you love me, be sure to say you love me with my own will. So when I tell Jesus I love him, if I remember, I say, I love you with your own will. Adam was our reflection, and these reflections gave him so much beauty as to enrapture our love and render him perfect in all of his acts. Perfect was the glory he gave to his Creator, perfect his adoration, perfect his love, perfect his works. His voice was so harmonious as to resound in the whole creation, because he possessed the divine harmony and the harmony of that fiat which had given him life. Something came to mind to add to that, but I already lost it. Each word of his was one more harmonious note that resounded. Everything was love in him. Oh, no, it was. That these are the things, a lot of this is what Jesus, when God was walking with Adam in the cool of the evening and teaching him. These are the things that God was teaching Adam about the gift that he'd given him. And so here we are learning the things that Adam was told, and then plus more, because he cut it off at a certain point. You must know that each prayer, each reparation, each act of love, indeed any holy thing that a creature does, is one more paradise that she acquires. So the simplest holy act will form one more paradise. One act omitted means one less paradise. So we've heard about many mansions in heaven, but here he's saying that the soul of the divine will have lots of different, what he calls paradises within heaven after it dies, for every good act that they did in the divine will. In the kingdom of my will, there will be no interruption of banquets or communions. They will be perennial. And everything that I did in redemption will no longer be as a remedy, but as a delight, a joy, a source of happiness, and ever-increasing beauty. This was the reason why our love, our light, our joys, our power, and beauty gushed out all together, and overflowing outside of our divine being. They spread the table before the one whom with so much love we had formed, that is Adam, with our creative hands, and generated with our very breath. We wanted to enjoy our work, see him happy with our own happiness, embellished with our own beauty, enriched with our own richness. By the way, to really be happy, you have to be holy. So if you're not holy, you won't be really happy. So they come together. So the holier that we become, the happier we will be. And we should want to be holy because God wants us to be holy. As I pour myself out with you, Louisa, in speaking, I feel as if I were just now giving start to creation. And that is why in these papers, I think we read that before, I'm making you write the true reason of creation, what my will is infinite value, and how one is to live in it. Yeah, I did read that before, and how it wants to reign and to render everybody happy and holy. Creation will be completed by the reigning of the divine will in the midst of creatures. In the beginning, until we breathed life into Adam, of all things created by us, no one thing had said that it loved us. I think I've read before, but now in hearing that man loved us, our joy, our contentment was so great that as the fulfillment of our feast, we constituted him king of all the universe. It's quite possible now when I was putting these extracts together that I may have repeated some without realizing it. There's no greater sacrifice before us